The Ice Age, an ancient world whose people and cultures are long forgotten. What remains, handed down from our ancestors, are mysteries. And among the most luminous of those mysteries is their beautiful and sublime cave art. But what you might not know is that alongside those incredible galleries of mammoth, reindeer, horses, bison, and strange hybrids of human and beast, are many mysterious, abstract, and geometric signs. In 2016, Genevieve von Petzinger published a book called The First Signs. In that book, she describes her experience studying cave art and coming across images of these abstract signs. She says no one was really paying attention to them, and she got curious. So she set about collecting and cataloguing all the signs she could find in every European cave she could get to, and she put them together in a database. All in all, she found 32 abstract signs dated across 30,000 years of the Ice Age in Europe. So if you're looking for an Ice Age mystery, here's one. You have these mysterious signs. They appear in cave art and portable art from all over Europe, and they appear from at least 40,000 years ago, right up to the end of the Ice Age. And no one knows what they mean. But everyone wonders, could the signs be a kind of writing? Imagine if they were. Imagine if we could work out what they meant. We would gain access to an unbelievable wealth of knowledge. We could know as much about people 40,000 years ago as we do about the ancient Egyptians, because history begins with writing, and discovering an Ice Age writing system could potentially turn prehistory into history. But for a long time, not many people were thinking like this. When researchers saw lines and dots and zigzags and other shapes painted on rock walls, they didn't necessarily think much of them. They sometimes just ignored them, even left them out of drawings or descriptions of cave art because they just weren't seen as meaningful. But there were a few people who were paying attention, and in the 50s and 60s, they began to look at the signs more closely. Were they representative of males and females? A kind of sexual symbolism? That's what was argued by one influential French researcher. He thought rounded or closed signs represented the female, and thinner lines and dots represented the male. And this was all very French and very 60s. The claim that the signs were intentional and meaningful was a significant one. But his interpretation of the signs was considered too subjective and a bit weird. Then in the 70s, people started thinking that the signs could be a kind of tally system, a way to record the phases of the moon or the habits of animals. This was a really controversial idea at the time, but it supported what we now know to be true, which is that humans had extensive cognitive complexity way back in the Paleolithic and were completely capable of creating a system to record knowledge, remember events, and plan ahead. And so that got a lot of people thinking about the signs as artificial memory systems, AMSs, or what a layperson might call a mnemonic system, or just memory craft. Recently, the discussion has shifted again because in 2023, a man called Bennett Bacon turns up and he claims that the marks are a written script. And he also claims he can read that script. It's a bit of a stretch though, because he only looks at three signs: lines, dots, and the Y sign. He says the lines and dots are numerical notations and that the Y sign means to give birth. So he reads these sign sequences as records of herd migrations and populations. Now, most people think that's bollocks, not least because there were a number of weird discrepancies in this guy's study. But maybe he was right about the signs being some kind of writing system. There was a very recent study that came out only a few months ago where the researchers did a computational analysis of Ice Age marks. They digitized the way the marks were structured and used in sequences, and they found that the Ice Age marks were remarkably similar in structure to a simple writing system called proto-cuneiform. So maybe the signs are a writing system, if not a full written language. And while a lot of people would find this idea a leap too far, still others believe that this is only scratching the surface of what our Ice Age ancestors were up to. Right now, we just don't know. But one thing I'm completely sure of is that if Paleolithic people didn't invent writing, it wasn't because they weren't capable of it. These were people living within a complex symbolic culture. We know this because they were responsible for some of the most beautiful and skilled paintings to have ever been made. They were incredibly skilled craftsmen and creative, resourceful people who managed to survive an entire ice age by living off the land. If they had needed a writing system, they would have invented one. This is why I really don't think that the marks are a notation system for tracking migrations or a lunar calendar or anything similar, because I don't see why Paleolithic people would have needed such a thing. Why would you need a line carved on a stick to remember that the mammoth goes south in winter when your entire livelihood depends on what those mammoths are up to? Here's what I think. I think Paleolithic people had the whole of nature itself for their sign system. They would have known when the mammoth were moving, not just because they were following the mammoth, but because the weather was changing, certain flowers and plants were blooming, the song of a certain bird changed. I think they understood birdsong and animal sounds and the movement of the stars and the changing shape of the river, and they knew when it would rain and where the cave bears were hiding and which plants would harm and which would heal. The natural world is already an interconnected language of signs, and it's a language they would have been taught to read from infancy. We instinctively make meaning from signs in our world. That's how we can read a book, for example. Once you've learned how to do it and it clicks, it becomes automatic and fluent. We read the signs and they transmit the knowledge encoded in the signs, and it seems direct, a direct transmission. And that's how it was for Paleolithic people, reading the world around them like a book, instinctively and intuitively connecting natural phenomena to systems of knowledge. They had no need to make artificial marks to encode that information about nature that was readily available to them from nature itself. So, what do the signs mean? What knowledge did they encode? Paleolithic people didn't need a writing system to help them navigate the natural world. But there are events and knowledge that don't have a material, visible, audible, sensory form. The non material, non physical realms. Imagination, the realm of dreams, where the dead go, where we exist before we're born, the supernatural, the inexplicable, the liminal. Songs, stories, mythologies, lessons, messages from dreams, they needed to be remembered somehow. The oral traditions of the Paleolithic cultures must have been complex, intricate, beautiful, Maybe they were woven over many lifetimes. And these stories, this knowledge, this record of creation would have needed to be learned and remembered. And so it was stored in symbols, signs encoded with details of stories, spells, rituals, of things remembered and imagined, of history and mythology. The Ice Age marks were, I think, a kind of memory craft. Or maybe it's more accurate to say a kind of spiritual craft, a spiritual technology. And likely they didn't know themselves where this technology came from, why a crossed line or a circle could hold information, why we knew we could scratch a line in the rock and associate it with something that existed in our minds. How we learned that making a mark, making a sign is, as the ancient Egyptians believed, a profound magic spell, a powerful act of creation, and a way of carrying memory through generations. Maybe the marks were always intended to be messages. Maybe they are messages to us, to the people of the future. Maybe the signs were always intended to be portals, portals that lead us into our imaginations, into the imaginal, the same realm that our ancestors travelled to in their dreams, in their stories. If we read these signs, if we dream them, if we let them work on us, if we invite them to work through us, if we create the paintings and stories and dances and songs that they inspire, maybe we really can meet our ancestors in that other place, in the time outside of time. And if you think that sounds like a lot of weird, mystical nonsense, maybe a good question to ask yourself is, what is a symbol anyway? Where does the practice of connecting an idea with a written mark come from in the first place? Did we invent symbols? Or is a symbol a kind of entity that emerges from consciousness and is made manifest through us? Are we doing the same thing as a flower does when it grows into a certain shape? Or the same thing a spider does, weaving her web, unconsciously making shapes and patterns that are ultimately determined by nature? And if so, what does that make nature? This is Wake of the Ancestors, and these mysteries are what I am here to explore in this podcast, in my writing, and in real life experimentation and creating. Thanks for listening, and I hope we meet again soon.